Welcome back to another episode of the High Vibration Reset. I'm your host, Ciara Conlon, and I'm very excited about my guest today, Brian Sheehan, CEO of Women for Election. Now, Brian has been involved for many years in politics, social justice, advocacy, and campaigning. He was co-director of the Yes campaign in the 2015 same-sex marriage referendum and executive director of GLEN, one of Ireland's leading LGBTI equality and advocacy organisations. More recently, Brian was general secretary of a political party in Ireland with a very strong track record in promoting women's participation in politics. This is a conversation I want all women to hear, whether you're interested in politics or not. Because every time I speak to Brian, I leave feeling fired up to do more to improve female representation in Ireland. In this conversation, we talk about the shocking reality of Ireland's female representation in politics and why we need to get more women involved. We also speak about why politics matters to every single one of us. And we explore about how women can get involved, how they can support, advocate for, and encourage women who are stepping forward to do so. This is not a political conversation. It's a social conversation, a conversation about leadership, and a conversation about creating a better Ireland for everyone. So I hope you enjoy. Hello, Brian. Thank you so much for joining me today on the High Vibration Reset.
Hello, and it's lovely to be with you, Ciara. Thank you for having me on.
So, Brian, I'd love if you start by telling us a little bit more about you and why this work has drawn you to be your mission in life.
I always think of John McGahern's novel Amongst Women, and I always think I've been blessed amongst women all my life. I grew up in a family of women, 3 sisters. My parents were very strong on community engagement involvement, so I learned quick enough that my sisters could do anything I could do, and that was just it. So it was never presented as different. And when you come from that kind of background of strong women, engaged women, my mom and all her friends deeply involved in community, you see women's leadership as a very natural thing. And then, like, for a long time, I worked in LGBTI advocacy, was involved in the marriage campaign, was involved in politics with a political party at an organizational level. And I always felt that our world would be an awful lot better if we had more women at the decision-making tables. Like, it would just be easier for everyone. And when the political party I was with put a lot of effort into ensuring that more women were included, that we shaped how we did things so that they would be a natural fit for women rather than an exceptional fit for women. And we did in all our elections. We had a balance of men and women in candidates and a balance of men and women elected. So after I stepped down from that job, this role came up, and I think it was a bit of a challenge for some that there's now a man in an organization called Women for Election. But I suppose I had some useful background that was helpful, and I suppose maybe if I'm good to men, you would say that we need male allies to shape the society we want just as much as we need far more women at every level.
Absolutely. And I think you've won over all the listeners by just saying you're blessed amongst women. So that was a great start. But no, I think you're dead right there. And it has to be done from an equal standpoint. We need male feminists as much as we need female ones. But tell us a bit more about the organization that you are working for, if people aren't familiar with it, Women for Election.
So Women for Election was founded by Niamh Gallagher and Michelle O'Donnell Keating about 14 years ago. And in essence, they were campaigning on the Lisbon referendum, and it caused them to kind of step back and look at politics a bit more. And they went, oh my God, there's no women anywhere. And issues had come up. Look, some of us are old enough to remember those referendums, but issues had come up about military neutrality, about those kinds of issues. And it seemed that women's voices were missing from those campaigns. And then they kind of realized, oh, well, actually, women's voices are missing from politics. So they began set up the organization, and it was very tough going in the early years because you had to win over an awful lot of people who could buy into the idea. But slowly they managed to pull together an organization, and they ran lots of programs for women who were interested in politics or didn't know they were interested in politics, but were interested in leadership and ended up in politics. A lot of them elected, but not necessarily elected, because there's many roles you can engage in politics, such as policy formation, helping other women get elected, and obviously running for election yourself. And they and a lot of academics were really involved at the time in bringing through gender quotas. Now, gender quotas are really interesting. And I suppose my sense about gender quotas, there's an awful lot of debate always about quotas, but we might not like them, but we like what they do, because they create spaces for talented, capable women to get through those glass ceilings. And they were involved in, like, in the end, in quotas came in the law the first election was in 2016, so that all parties must have 30%, a minimum of 30% men and 30% women candidates in an election. Otherwise, they lose half of their state funding. In the last general election, that went up to 40%. And it's only in general elections. And that was perceived to be a balance between a voter's right to choose who they want to represent themselves and a voter's having good representative body of people, if you like, talented people to choose from. So from that kind of time, Women for Election has done the same thing. We kind of have a couple of strands. We try to find those brilliant women that we all know should be in politics in communities and encourage them to learn more about politics, and then equip them to run an election campaign. We do a fair bit of advocacy to try and shift the barriers that are there for everyone in politics, but in particular for women, and often in a particular way for women who come from minority backgrounds, traveller women, migrant women, LGBT women, disabled women. And we also, I think, do a bit of work about trying to explain to the public, the voting public, why more women matter in politics. Because I think that's the great bit. We have phenomenal women running in every election. And if we tend as voters, we love our voting system, PR is great, but we tend to go for incumbents a lot more than we go for the new. And I think we have to kind of understand how the absence of women it means our politics is unfinished.
So there's a lot in that there, which we'll go through bit by bit, Brian. So first of all, I think most of us maybe subliminal know we need more women in politics. But what are the reasons or, statistics or facts that show us that when we have more female representation, we have better outcomes?
The simple answer is that it's tricky to give you direct evidence, right? Because it's always counterfactual. Because if you have less men, you have more women, but you haven't got an experiment where you can do the opposite. However, what's very clear in international research all over the world, right, is that more women in politics leads to a greater concentration on day-to-day issues, on health, on education, on welfare, on housing, the things that benefit the communities by and large in a broad context. Interestingly, women are recognized to work much harder for their constituents than men. Women, this is probably so that's the kind of, I suppose the other one to add in that case is look, it's a very broad lens, right? But women's leadership styles tend to be more collaborative, more inclusive, so that stuff gets done more. There's more focus on getting stuff done than sitting there talking about doing stuff. And then there's other stuff I think that's really important, well, given the global context we're in, which is there's a lot less corruption and a lot less prone to war and human rights violations when you have more women in government. And I suppose the key bit that's really important is that when our politics is representative of who we are in its broadest context, there's far more trust in politics. So more women increases the electoral integrity, increases the trust in politics, and increases the sense that politicians, as a big umbrella, are representing me more. And I think nowadays, in a time when there's lots of attacks on democracy, from the malign, trying to undermine democracy, to those who are leveraging issues to try and build a political name for themselves. We see it hugely in the UK, for example. More women actually brings more solidity and sustainability to democracy. And while we might not always have thought of that as a reason for having more women, I think it's becoming more and more. All we have to do is look at our, either side of us, Britain and America, and you see that democracy itself is under severe challenges, and more women actually solidifies and helps people trust democracy more. So from the very biggest systemic level right through to the what politics does and how it makes decisions, more women benefits all of us.
Yeah. It reminds me of Marianne Williamson, who ran as a Democratic candidate, and what do you call those pre-elections in the States? And
Primaries.
primaries, exactly. And I remember her saying that if she got in, she would form a Department of Peace, not a Department of War. So I think that's a, a good representation of maybe more the how a woman thinks about leadership and politics as a whole.
Well, let
But
me tell you a story if I can. So this
please,
is a really interesting one about Iceland, right? So Iceland is the top of the global gender equality index for the last 16 years. It's the most equitable society in the world. It is one of the societies with least strife. They have loads of problems, but that has least trouble. 50 years ago, the women of Iceland went on strike. 90% of the women of Iceland went on strike for a day, literally down tools. There's a fabulous film, if anyone gets a chance to see it, The Day Iceland Stood Still. It's brilliant. But what that did is it began a revolution of women coming to the fore in organizations, right? And what you now have in Iceland, well, actually, that was 1975. In 1980, the very first woman elected president anywhere in the world was in Iceland, and she was elected for 2 terms, or 3 terms maybe. But now in Iceland, you have a woman prime minister heading a coalition government of 3 parties, each of which is headed headed by a woman. There's a majority of women in the cabinet. There's 46% women in parliament and 51% women in local government. The Bishop of Iceland is a woman. The heads of the 3 universities in Iceland. So what you've got is a society where it is more equal for everyone. And both cause and effect of that is there has been more women in leadership levels from local government right up to the president and national government. So there's a great example of actually this builds a better society for everyone when we have more women.
amazing, yeah. So to see it that it actually impacts leadership overall, and any negatives in that. So if women are to take over the world, what's the downside? Or have there, in any other nations, have you seen that there is, you know,
Well, it's
f-
an interesting one. I mean, like, you'd want to be kind of not paying any attention anywhere to know that there's a huge backlash now against gender equality all over the world. So I suppose when progress is made, there often is a backlash. And and things that we thought were solid and accepted suddenly become variable. You know, and I don't mean this disparagingly about some women, but there's the trad wives movement now. That, of course, it's an absolutely a person's choice to do that. But when it's multiplied up into a kind of an anti-democratic movement or an anti-gender equality movement. Something else is going on. So you see these things happening. You see the rise in a version of masculinity, which is only a small number of people, but because of the internet and everything, it gets more volume, which seems to me to be about how you use women rather than how you live with, love women. So you see this rising. So I suppose in a way, when the people who have had power for millennia have that disrupted now, whether that's the rights of black and brown people in Ireland or LGBTI people or women or whatever, like there is a backlash. And again, I naively thought that we'd be immune from that in Ireland, but actually we're not. It turns out we're just lagging behind the others. So I do think the women taking their rightful places at decision-making tables everywhere, that benefits everyone, also has a backlash. And I think part of the challenge we have to do is explain why it matters that we have more women at those tables. And actually, like one of the things is all around, every one of us, all around us can see brilliant women. They're running our communities. They're doing everything, right? And somehow or other, we don't seem to translate that into, ooh, that might work really well at every level. And if you're in a corporate, for example, right, you know it, because no corporate worth its salt thinks it's grand. We'll have nice white middle-class men at the management tables. Sure, that's grand. And they do and they fail because they're not diverse. They don't understand it. There's no new thinking. There's no new ways of doing things. And somehow or other, we haven't quite figured out, to get to that as a country, we need to make sure we have more women and more women from diverse backgrounds in at those decision-making tables.
So, I mean, the mission of Women for Election initially was to get more women to run. So to get more women to realize that they could go from being president of the local GAA club to, moving that into
President of Ireland.
President of Ireland, for example. So that was the initial, and we got more women running. So, what's the next step, or even taking a step back, right? How do those people at, community level who are involved in everything, who are natural leaders, how do those people take a step maybe and try out politics?
Those women that we all know, they run community organizations. They're the people you go to when somebody has an idea, when you need a playground, when in tragedies, actually, women are fantastic. Men are too, right? So it's not an exclusionary issue. They're running community level organizations. There's teachers, there's nurses, there's SNAs who are at the front line and understand, in a way, what the core issues are for a lot of people. And they're the glue that keeps communities together. Now, I consider that all to be small p politics. So women are doing small p politics in our communities across the whole country. Our job is to try and help them to think of that as big P politics, so that instead of actually contacting your councillor and your TD and lobbying and trying to get a bit of funding for a new playground or trying to get, footpaths put in or all of those kind of things, why aren't those women the people who make the decisions about where the footpaths go and where the playgrounds are built, and that the playground is fully accessible, and that there's toilets available in corners where when you're out in a park, all those kind of things, as well as the bigger things. So I think an awful lot of women are politicians, but they have no concept of being a politician. And our job is to say to them, you're doing it already. Um, and then, work with people to say, look, we could help you move a step closer. Now, that step doesn't have to end up being president of Ireland. It doesn't have to end up being a councillor. It doesn't have to end up being anything. First of all, more women are running than ever before. They need teams of people to help them. They need people to help knock on doors, to deliver leaflets, to manage their social media, to organize volunteers, to do everything. This, again, the stuff that women are doing all the time already. Some women will think, oh, okay, I think I'll think about running, and we'll provide a full suite of training measures that help you look at how you describe yourself, how you articulate why you might run, what an election looks like, what an election campaign looks like, how you might do a bit of media training, all of those kind of things, how you'll um, if you like, develop your confidence into being that kind of a public person. And some of those women will then run for selection within a party or run independently, and some of those will go and run, right? So it's a long kind of pipeline, and women are needed at every stage of that pipeline. We did, after the last local elections, when more women ran than ever before, 21% more women ran than ever before, 679 women ran in the local elections, which is phenomenal, right? That was in 2024. And after the election, we showed a film, Mrs. Robinson, another great film about another great Irish woman, and to an audience of women who hadn't been elected. And many of the women, as had worked with and as they were coming to the cinema, said, oh, yeah, no, I'm John, thanks. God, woof, no, I'm John, right? And they watched the film, and Mayor Robinson Kane was brilliant in a warm and funny Q&A. And she kept saying, well, I lost loads of elections. I've no idea what I learned, but I learned an awful lot. And she also kind of shaped running for election as something more than an individual woman running to get elected. It's about creating a space for women in politics. It's about indicating that women are and want to be part of politics, dispelling that myth that women don't want to be there. And it's also about saying to everybody else around them, no, no, our rightful place as women is actually at political tables. And that inspires both themselves, because many will run again, and many more women. And Mary Robbins was great at making that kind of link, that running as a woman running for election, it is of course about you trying to get elected, but it's also about claiming a space for women in the political realm that has always excluded women.
It is, it's always something when I hear you speak, I feel so inspired to move, to act and get that. But
So does
one of
that mean you're going to run for election then, Ciara?
the, we're going to edit that bit out.
Yeah.
No, but it is that. And that's exactly it. You get this moment of inspiration, moment of wanting to do something, but then either inertia or busyness or fear of I couldn't do that, or it's going to be too much, because women are so overloaded with work and families and, all the other roles that we play. So how do you speak to women about that, to get over that big barrier, to actually get them to even think about it further or have a conversation about it?
I know it's a trope, but I hear it all the time. A job comes up, is advertised, and a woman says, oh, I could do about 50% of that. Don't know if I should apply. And a man goes, oh, I could do about a third of that. Of course I'll apply, right? And that's a whole thing about a sexist society, societal conditioning. This isn't rocket science, right? And the same is true of politics. So what we do a lot of is we explain how politics is to women. We, can bring women to go to a council meeting. So, sometimes terribly boring, right? Because it's a process. But actually, when you hear other councillors, women councillors, and indeed men councillors, for example, talking, you realize, oh, you can actually get a lot of things done. And I suppose what I would say to women is, one, of course you can do it, right? Of course you can do it. We know you can, because all around you and all around you, women are already doing it. So that isn't the question, right? So there are talented, capable women everywhere. That's the first thing, right? And that's you. If you're listening, that's you. You can do it. The second thing is, you don't actually have to run for election. You can think about politics. You can get more engaged in politics, because actually politics is the work of trying to make decisions that affect all of the community, raising resources, scarce resources, and spending them. So you should be part of that. And the second or third thing is, you can actually make an awful lot of change to the people around you. There's one councillor, uh, and we ask women councillors, we'll have a little video series coming out later, like, what's the best thing you did as a councillor? And it's really, one person's thing has always stuck with me. She said, I cycle in along the seafront every day to City Hall in Dublin, and I see seats in bus stops, and I see older people, I see women with kids, I see people with a disability sitting on those seats while they're waiting for buses. And I say to myself, I got those seats in buses. And it's the smallest thing, but every day that gives her a little fillip to go, oh, okay, I can put up with the tedious, difficult meetings. I can do all those things. Spoke to another councillor in Dunleary Rathdown, and between the last cycle of local elections, 2019 to 2024, was 50%. Dunleary Rathdown Council, the first council in the country that ever got to 50% women. Only once in the state has there been a majority of women in a council, and that was briefly in South Dublin County Council. But in any event, this is Dunleary Rathdown. And around the same time, the chief executive of the council and a lot of the senior officers in the council were women as well. So there was let's say 50% women either side. And what the councillor said to me was, a whole lot of stuff that you might have had to argue for, you didn't have to argue for anymore. So an accessible playground. There was, half of the women councils were meeting the officials where half were women. And it was just saying, look, we need an extra playground there, and it needs to be a fully accessible playground. And there was no need to debate it. The question was, okay, how do we find money for it? And that's what you can deliver as a woman who seeks to be delivering those kinds of things, from the benches in the bus stop to the local park, to the council cleaning up your area, to rubbish removal, towards planting in an area, towards making fields for play areas for kids, sports fields, everything. You can be the one who helps the council decide where that goes. The stuff that you're trying to do in the community anyway, for your kids, for everything. So getting women are doing it anyway.
Yeah.
So it's not a massive leap. And it turns out women are very good at it, and they can do it. Our job is to be a kind of a support as you get there and when you're there. And there's lots of other supports as well. So I would say to anyone even thinking about, actually, I need to know more about politics because actually I see that that's where decisions are made, then come talk to us. Again, we're not going to say, if you come talk to us, by the way, you have to run an election. That's way down the line. Some women, of course, are going, I'm determined to do it already from day one, and that's great. But it's not about that. It's about our governments, our local and national governments, make decisions that impact on all of us. Women are the people who, in effect, because of care and other relationships, feel the impact of those decisions more than anyone else. That's not to say that men don't, of course. And I think women have solutions that aren't being implemented because they're not at those tables.
And a lot of what you talk about there, Brian, is local politics, so getting the benches in bus stops. So how does that next level come? So, we want more women deciding on the education system and going into those upper echelons and actually having more policy impact at that higher level to how the country is run. So what's that step then, going from local
The
to
majority,
national?
the majority of people who are in national government, so in the Shannon or in the Dáil, the majority of those who are there would already have been a councillor before. Okay, so a council does two things. One, councillors work on issues in their own area, and that's brilliant. Some of those councillors decide to bring their knowledge and experience to the national level, and it's of course not all, but the majority would have been a councillor before. And in that sense, the council is a really good training ground for national politics, because you go, okay, I see how the system works. Okay, but the step up the other piece about a council one is you learn how to engage with people on the doors, to listen to people, to understand their concerns, and to respond and say, me as an independent or my party and I, here's our solution to that, right? And women who are so solution focused can carry those into national parliament. So the step up is like, certainly if you've been a councillor, the step up isn't, of course it's a big step up, but it's not a massive step up in terms of if you've been a councillor. One way or another, you become a public figure and you have to ask people to vote. Like, I have never run for election except in, non-profit type network organizations. And I kind of think I don't know if I could ask someone at a door to vote for me, right? And I think that's the biggest barrier. I have campaigned for many people, actually mostly women, who are super, and I have no problem going to the door and saying, oh my God, that Ciara Conlon, she's fantastic. Let me tell you why. What are your issues? Actually, Ciara has really good solutions for that. And I can do that. Asking someone to say, hi, I'm Brian Sheehan, will you vote for me? That's a different thing. And I think that's the barrier that women find hard to overcome. And I get it. I absolutely get it because I haven't run for election for those kind of reasons. And also I don't have enough of a localized network. But the step up to national policy is just doing that at a bigger scale. I suppose one of the things is, like, we have an opposition with three main parties, each headed by women. Okay. We have, out of 15 cabinet members, the formal constitutional government, we have 4 women. We have never had more than 4 women in cabinet. And Catherine Zappone, who was a cabinet minister in 2011, she's written a memoir, and in it she talks about, she went into government as an independent, as a children's minister. And she had worked in an organization called Uncason in Tala, doing loads of work across the community. Her and her wife, Annie Gilligan, set it up, the shanty in Uncason. And it was brilliant, just brilliant work there. Women's education, empowerment, childcare, all those kind of things. She understood the need for childcare and went into government saying, I am going to bring state-funded or provision of childcare to fruition, right? Now, we all know it's not enough, but that's not the first one. So in her memoir, she talks about being in cabinet, and there was a reluctance to go with her commitment. And she says, well, first of all, she says that I'm leaving government if you don't, right? But the second thing is, she describes how she explained to cabinet why state-provided childcare was essential and why women needed it, and how care was such a challenge for women to overcome, to be able to participate in community life, in political life, and in work life, right? And she talks about how, in a way, the scales fell away among the other male ministers who of course, very many of them were parents themselves, but they never quite got it until there were more women there, I think, right? That's what I'm reading from her. And I think that's the space. Women already have the knowledge, the expertise, the experience. And there's a technical bit we have to get through, which is to get you into the Dáil or the council or the Dáil and then into government. But actually, it's not a massive step up in a way. I mean, of course it is, right? And not, but the baseline skills, experiences, and commitment to communities and constituents that women have carries through from the council to the national.
I suppose that council piece as well gives them, the women, the confidence that they can do it, that they're no different at that level. So therefore, if they take that first step, they're more likely to see that it's possible to keep going. So confidence tends to be a big thing all over, and women in leadership, and yes, that fear of taking on too much. But there seems to be a bigger barrier than that, Brian. I mean, we are, what is it, at the bottom 6? Are we still at the
We're 22nd out of the EU 27 in the number of women in local government. We're 98th in the world in the number of women in national government. So we're the worst by far in Western Europe. And when we say that to people, they look at us and say, what? And I think we think we're better. Well, we do think we're better than we are, but that figure of 98th in the world really shocks people. And it's like, but How could we do that? And in a way, we have 3 women presidents. We have very strong and articulate women in national government and have had over a number of years. But they're not representative of our politics. Now, the one shining light in it is our Shannon is 45% women, but our Dáil is 24% women. Like our local government is 27% women. Like we literally have no women where we need them. And I don't mean where we and women for election. I mean where we collectively, where we need women to be part of making those decisions. All politics works better when there's a gender balance, when there's a parity between men and women, and when we bring in a diversity of voices, so that we're not, and this isn't disparaging, we're not all white middle class professionals, right? Of men and so like that's what good politics is. That's how good decision making, and all of us know it because we've all been on groups and committees and everything else, and we know that even when somebody drives you bonkers because they're very different from you, you go, oh yeah, but that's a great idea, actually. That's what makes really good outcomes. And we are at the bottom.
So for such we see ourselves as such a progressive little nation. We've led the world in lots of other areas. But, what do you see is that issue? Like, why aren't we getting women in there? We've got the women to run. You said 679 women ran. How many people ran in total? Like, is that a small percentage or is that a good percentage?
That was about 31%. So I think it was 1,400 if my math is correct. So about I think the figures might be correct, about that. I suppose the issue, we talk about things like the 5 C's, right, which is kind of a standard thing, and it's um, uh, confidence, cash, childcare, candidate selection, and political culture. Okay, we might now add a 6th C, cyber, and we can talk about that in a second. So we all understand care. Women, like it's not a surprise to anyone that care burden falls unequally on women, and that impacts everything from jobs to politics. Right? It is. That the cash is an interesting one. People think you need an awful lot of money to run in elections. You do and you don't, right? So we have great rules in this country that limit the amount of money you can receive as a politician and can spend in elections, right? And I have seen people win seats in local government from a campaign of €700. And I've seen many people win an election in a local a council seat in a campaign where and this is all public. So, what you spend is public, where you spend 3, 4, 5,000, right? Now that's an awful lot of money. However, it's, if you set out to do it 2, 3 years in advance, you'll find that it's relatively, people are delighted to support women running. They'll go to a pub quiz, they'll go to a table quiz, they'll buy a ticket they'll do all that. Of course, it's a lot of money, but actually there are many, many people who would love to see you as a woman running and will be happy to support it and give a tenner for a table quiz. So it's not that hard to raise that for those purposes. So cash, in a way, we see 5 million gone to Farage. Like, we're not in that league. Politics in Ireland isn't. Political culture is an interesting one. So political parties have, our oldest parties are 100 or more years old, right? So they have long traditions. Women's entry point to politics is different than men's. There are more men elected. Our biggest problem in political terms is incumbency. Of all of, like, across the country, there's 949 seats in councils, which are up for election every 5 years. The next time is in 2029. 75% of those seats go to people who are already elected, right? So they run again. They stand in front of their constituents. You have a huge advantage if you're already elected. People know you. People like to vote for who they know. So they vote for them and they keep going, which means the window, or the little, what do they call it, the Overton window of getting in is small, right? So, male allies, the best thing male allies who are elected councillors could do was step down, not rerun, and support women in your party to run in your stead, right? So that's a big challenge. And And all the parties, the larger parties, all have women's networks. So, like, you don't have to run as a party member. Lots of women run as independent. Uh, there are women's groups in almost all parties. They're really good at supporting and mentoring women running forward who want to run for elections. They're providing loads of opportunities to get involved, to be involved in policy making within a party. If you're working as an SNA, then you don't want to run for election. You could join, you don't have to join a party, but you could join a party and be involved in the development of policy in the area of childcare, in the area of disability, and all those kind of areas. So there's lots of opportunities to get involved in networks. But political cultures need time to change. And I think there needs to be a leadership from the top down, leadership to say, we're done here, we're moving. And some of the parties that are smaller are very strict on their, voluntary quotas of 50-50 or as near 50-50 men and women as they can get. So, and you could see that in the number of people who ran in all elections by gender, right? And also various parties are very good at bringing new people in Ireland, new communities, people of colour. Oddly enough, the larger parties are maybe better than the smaller parties, but that's another issue. So political cultures need to shift. And I think candidate selection is a tricky one because that's connected. So in an area, a party will say, we're going to run two people here, and you have to compete within the party, within the branch, to be selected to run, right? And this is where men's entry point to politics is different. Sometimes men are around a long time and understand how all that works, whereas women are, coming in a year ahead of an election saying, yeah, I think I'd really like to do it, but actually you're too late to get selected, so there's tricky bits around that. And I think the one that people worry about is cyber. Um, and I suppose, well, let's put it this way: the media love to go out on the story of the awful experiences of women, which are awful and which happen all the time, particularly to women from minority backgrounds, women of color, traveller women, LGBT women. So I'm not for a millisecond discounting the awful behaviours the state and its various agencies and are not addressing in any way. But the vast majority of women, we keep going out to the media saying the vast majority of women, the vast majority of times have respectful interactions at the door, even when somebody doesn't agree with their politics. Because actually, the majority of Irish people respect somebody for trying to stand for election, right? That doesn't for a millisecond mean there aren't awful things happening. Lots of support to provide for people. And, I would say to anyone who's on X, get off X, just close it down. It makes no difference, right? But there are other ways of engaging nowadays. And there's ways of engaging that minimize your exposure. But we also work with women on resilience. How do you actually realize that, these are not necessarily directed at you personally, even though it absolutely feels personal. It's actually part of a bot farm that's out to destroy democracy, that's out to destroy the progress of women. It's,
Yeah.
it doesn't mean that it's not deeply hurtful and terribly upsetting. And I'm not trying to minimize that at all, but there's a process. And I always think we need a good Irish mammy. I think if I said some of the things I've seen on social media, if my mother saw that, you can clip around the ear and say, take that down, you can't say that. So we kind of need to get back to that and say, oh, come off it. Like throughout the by-elections recently, we ran a campaign, Be Part of a Better Conversation. So I would encourage everyone, you don't have to have anything to do with policy, you never have to come near women's election. Every time you see women coming up in social media and politics, like, even if you don't necessarily agree with their politics, say something nice. Just say, great to see more women in politics. So anything, or I agree with your policy, or keep going, or whatever, because actually all of us need a bit of encouragement from time to time. And not many of us in our jobs get knocked down, or people trying to knock us down on a constant basis. So the more encouragement we give, so be part of a better conversation, follow, a woman in politics. Say things like, great to see you running, delighted to see more women. Like, you don't have to say, I agree or disagree with that government policy or that opposition, but it's not about that. It's about encouraging the principle of more women. And I think we can all do that. That helps mitigate some of that kind of the cyber.
And I think that's really important because I know personally, before I got to know you and the organization, I would have been afraid to comment or like even a post for fear that I might have been supporting a party that maybe I didn't agree with all of their politics. And I think that is a barrier for that engagement sometimes. There's very often you'll see a female politician or any politician say something that makes a lot of sense, and rather than thinking too big about what me encouraging this person was saying, good point or well done, whatever it is, that does not have to mean anything deeper. It just means, yeah, well done, good job.
Yeah. And actually, in a way, like those people who have kids, when your kid does a small drawing of a house that's not a house, right? You don't say, well, that's a bit crap, right? You say, that's gorgeous. Now, how about doing straighter lines the next time, right? That's how you do it. It's how we encourage people. It's like, it's what we do all the time. And somehow when a person's in politics and they're a public person, some people feel they have a duty as well as a right to go, that's outrageous, right? And that's okay. You can do that. It's politics. It's public debate. Like, reasonable public debate is, and robust public debate is absolutely an essential part of politics. What's not accepted in politics is misogyny, sexism, racism, homophobia, and transphobia, right? And we have a way of being part of the solution to that by actually putting a note on a woman's post or liking one's post saying, "Oh, that's a really good thing." As you said, that's a really good point you made. Like, in your head, you might be going, comma, I don't agree with the overall policy, but you don't have to say that, right? It is about saying, or even, look, our politics is better when there's more women involved, or just well done, or whatever. Like in the by-elections, 4 women ran in Galway, 3 women ran in Dublin. Some of them were subject to vile abuse. And even if you didn't agree with the policy, saying, well done for standing, because standing is such a fantastic part of our democracy. Think of it. People you know, or you learn to know by virtue of their being all over the media or their posters, are actually standing up in front of you and all the community saying, I would like to represent you. This is what I will bring to politics, right? Would you vote for me, right? And that's your perfect choice to say yes or no. But it's really good that people stand. So even that was part of what we're saying is just say, well done for standing. Like, again, the bit in your head can be, I'm not voting for you, right? But that's okay too,
But I
all of
think
us are stronger when more women stand, when more women from diverse backgrounds stand, when traveller women, when Black women are who are part of our communities are standing in politics.
and it's important to also kind of see that or acknowledge that a lot of those women that are standing are scared shitless. They're doing this, the majority of them, because they see something that needs changing, because they feel that inspiration or motivation to make that change. So the majority of them, in my experience that I've met, they're not doing it for power. They're not doing it for money. They're not doing it for any of those negative reasons. They're doing it because they want to see change. And they know that if they don't stand up and be part of that change, it's not going to happen. So anybody listening, really do support the women that you see in your community in whatever shape or form, because even if traditionally the party that they're running for wasn't the party that you'd support, they are going to make a difference within that party. They are ultimately going to contribute to maybe having more diverse policies or, making changes that need to happen in these parties. So yeah, please support any women that are running. And Brian, so to come back to, how do we get involved? And you mentioned that, yeah, if you have an interest in seeing change happen, you don't have to be the one that runs. But I never thought of that you could be helping the team behind the woman to get her elected. So, what is that next step, people who are listening and hopefully inspired by listening to you and listening to this conversation? Is it get in touch with Women for Election? Is it
I
go?
think there's a lot of listeners who, for example, might have been involved in the marriage campaign or the repeal campaign, or maybe have, campaigned for others before. And by campaigning, I mean everything from making tea for the volunteers afterwards, for organizing volunteer rotas or canvassing rotas, to actually knocking on doors. And one of the things that I love doing is knocking on doors, because actually I get to hear what people's concerns are in a way that I kind of have only ever got through the filter of the media, or that kind of thing. And it's a really good thing in your own area to do that. We have lots of women who say, for example, are off maternity leave and say, actually, do you know what? I'm walking around during the day. I can drop leaflets in my estate, So there's lots and lots of ways that people can help. And if we want to see more women in politics, they need more women and men, but they need more people to help them get there. If you saw again some of the images around the by-election, each of the women's teams and the men's teams had lots of people out knocking on doors. Some of them will have been party members. An awful lot of them won't be. The model is changing. Generally speaking, parties haven't as much membership as they used to have of old, because it was, there are other outlets. It used to be quite a social and tribal almost thing. That's shifting, obviously, in the current days. So you don't have to be a member of a party, and you just have to say, I have time. I would like to see that person running, or even running a good campaign and getting elected, and I can help. So certainly talk to us in Women for Election. Over the next couple of years, we'll be running streams of courses. One from, I'd like to know more about politics. What's it all about? What does an election look like? And all that. Right up to, here's little courses you can do, or on, I don't know, on volunteering, on being a campaign manager, on being, if you're a social media person, how you might help a candidate. Right up to, actually, I think in the end, I might like to run myself. How would I go about that? So we do all of those. So absolutely, we can help. And if you have a particular interest in a political party, then ring them up. We can give you the contacts, right? Just ring them up and say, I'd like to become more involved. Most parties have branches in a constituency, so they're usually very welcoming, because they're delighted to get more people to help, and they're very nice people by and large, who share an interest in a political sense, and who are existing to support and bring in more people. So actually, it's not hard to get involved. What it is what you talk about, is the desire to want to see change happening and bringing more women into politics. And it doesn't have to be more, like, we would like to see more women in the campaign teams for men as well, because actually more women around politics in generally will reshape politics. So your male councillor who's running, or your male TD, the more women there are in their teams, the more they understand the perspective of women, the lived experience of women, the more they bring that into their decision making in political senses. So do it is the simple thing. And the last piece on that is, I think most of us at one time or another, relatively recently, have said, I think she'd be great in politics. So I think, in as much as we talked about encouraging women online, I think we should say to those women, do you know what? I think you should think about politics. Go and talk to that Women for Election crowd, or go to, but like you always talking about how we could fix things. How about being the person who fixes them, rather than the person who talks about how they could be fixed? And I think many cases, that person who fixes things and thinks you should be they should be in politics, is actually yourself. And I think for women to say, maybe it could be me, and if it's not me, maybe it could be her, because actually she's brilliant, and I'm going to say to her, you should be in politics. The old rule was, and it's the same probably in other things, a woman needs to be asked 5 times before to say, look, would you stand for politics, before she goes, maybe, right? Because the immediate reaction is, oh God, no, it couldn't be me. And, it can and is and should be.
So, listening to this conversation, you were asked at least 3 times, I think. It could be you. And hopefully, we'll get a few other people to encourage those amazing women to get involved. Brian, thanks so much for sharing this. And I hope there's many people listening that have a fire in their belly and who are inspired. But check out those 2 movies that he mentioned as well, which are, what is it? The Day Iceland
The
Stood
day I
Still,
stood still, and Mrs. Robinson.
Mrs. Robinson. And maybe that might be the extra push we need. But all of the details for Women for Election are below in the show notes. And yeah, thank you so much for giving us your time.
Not at all. Thank you very much. And thank you to all the women who actually have the courage to stand. We understand what that is and love working with women. So call me, call any of us here, even for a conversation that doesn't go anywhere yet. We're delighted to talk to people, listen to where they are, and see if we can help them on their next steps in the journey.
Thank you, Brian. Thanks for listening in. And I really hope you are inspired and motivated after that conversation to do something. And as Brian noted, it doesn't have to be get involved yourself in politics, but maybe you could support another woman to run. Maybe you could simply support on social media and encourage those women who can make a big difference to our political conversation and to politics and society in Ireland. So as always, please follow the podcast, share it with your friends and family, and help us to raise the vibration. Thank you for listening and have a wonderful inner day.